You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. So, let's now deal with the question, and I'm not forgetting that you deal with the question of academic freedom, and we will deal with it exhaustively. But let's begin to interrogate the question of veering away from your core discipline. And I asked myself, if I looked at, say, UPSA, I had an idea what UPSA appears to have been set up to do. But as we speak, it does appear to me that they are doing things that don't seem to be what they were originally set up to do. If I look at the university, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, by the time I was done with my first degree, 2002-2003 academic year at University of Ghana, I needed to do law. When I went to Legon, the year we went, they stopped the law until you have done your degree. So I was in Kumasi. Now, if the KNUST had not set up a law faculty, what it meant was that I would have had to come all the way to Accra to get a law degree in 2005. So whilst they may appear to have veered from what they were set up to do, some of us may not blame them. But that's the fact. The universities are veering away. KNUST, they're doing business, a lot of business courses now, doing law, all sorts of things. But we know that that was supposed to be a science and technology, hands-on. The technical universities, there is one gentleman who is also submitted a memorandum to Parliament, Albert Kwashiga, and in his memo, he makes the argument that the traditional universities have actually not veered away from their core mandate. It is rather the technical universities that appear to have veered away. And there is evidence to show, even if you check from the National Accreditation Board's own report of 2015, 2016, thereabout. So it's a fact. Many of the universities are veering away from their core values or core disciplines, except if this is the solution, we don't know.
Samson, if I can say 5 things, but before that, let me just remind all of us that it is the taxpayer who is funding higher education.
Right.
And so we should be accountable to the taxpayer, not to any particular government that happens to be in power. And I need to remind us that when we say governments are funding, governments are run by particular political parties.
Okay.
But it's the taxpayer that is funding.
That's right.
And also to say that over the years, the funding from central government for higher education has dwindled consistently, and that most of our, or a lot of our funding to run, government pays salaries, but most of the money we have to run our research and training comes from internally generated funds. People like us sitting here, when we close, we go and sit at home for hours when others are sleeping, writing research proposals, revising them, submitting them. It is denied you, you try again, it is denied you, you try again, you send it somewhere else, hours and hours, so you can get money to do the research you need to do, to get scholarships for your PhD students to join you in the research. So I need to put that on the table.
All right.
But there are 5 things I would like to say about veering from our mandate. The first is that I don't believe that the evidence has been provided for this. If we have veered from our mandate, let us know. Where have we veered from our mandate? I don't believe that this is factual. Public universities have different histories. And over the course of time, we look at what is evolving around us. So my first point is I don't think that this is factual.
University of Ghana.
Please, let me outline them and then we'll come to them. Secondly, anytime new programs have been established, it has gone by law. We have not just got up one fine morning and said, oh, let's look at peace and security. It has been backed by law. Our statutes have established these programs. And for example, the University of Ghana, the 2010 statutes went to Parliament. Parliament approved it. What are we saying about our parliamentarians? The third point is that all over the world, universities evolve to meet the ecosystem that we are living in. It may interest listeners to know that MIT, which is a technical university, high up there in the US, they do Asian studies, they do gender studies, they do theater arts, they do African studies. Is it part of their mandate? They have realized that these are courses that they need in the contemporary world. In addition to that, we want our students to be rounded. Should you learn only maths, you must have some understanding of the social world. You must appreciate philosophy. I remember when Mr. Otinjesi was chairman of council, he said that his study of philosophy had helped him in law and had helped him in business. We need rounded human beings who can think critically. And the last point that I would like to make that is that even if it were true that we have veered from our mandate, what is the NCTE doing? Was it just sitting down sleeping, watching us veer from our mandate? Do we need a new law to keep us on our track? So those are the five most important responses.
You almost have answered the question I was about to ask. You preempted it. And the question was that, as I know, even without reading, it will be that University of Ghana, for example, was set up and to do mainly in the humanities. But University of Ghana now has a big business enclave, so to speak, a business school. Of course, the University of Ghana Medical School has existed for a long time. But people can see and say, this is not the core thing you were set up to do. There's a bit of maybe too much focus on the business angle, business school aspect of what you have to do.
But who determines how much is too much? If we create graduates in business studies, what proportion of our students, has there been any national analysis to say we need only 2 business graduates a year and that they best come from this or that university? I think that we must do things objectively and scientifically. Just to make a sweeping statement that we have veered. And in any case, as I said, mandates evolve. You look at the ecosystem you are living in. You don't say that if in 1957 or 1958 we needed these disciplines, that today we're not looking at them. Peace and security has evolved as a very important area of study. Should we sit back and allow other universities around the world to pursue it, but we do not? Look at Noguchi, the Center for Medical Research. If not for Noguchi and other such centers, today in this COVID era, we would be hanging. And Noguchi has gone out looking for funds. Most of these funds have come from their own hard work and innovation, searching for external resources. And here we are all enjoying the benefits of that research. Have we veered from our mandate? Should we have just been training doctors and left out the research institutions? I think we should be a little bit more critical when we are making such comments.
And let me bring in Professor Mafu here. And Professor Charles Mafu, what do you say about this, particularly relating to the KNUST? And you have heard me, state what I think may have been the case for KNUST already.
Right. Well, obviously, I mean, as Prof. rightly pointed out, who decides who has veered off his or her mandate? The fact of the matter also is that, I mean, we are in a contemporary world where things keep changing. And so when things around us keep changing, you don't expect us to stay where we are.
We don't expect you to be jacks of all trades and master of none.
Well, that is true, but who is being the jack of all trades? I mean, as it was rightly pointed out, there are bodies that could put us in check if we are veering off in any way. But as Prof. rightly pointed out, there is no evidence to suggest that. In fact, NCTE norms suggest that if you are supposedly a science and technology university, there is a proportion that you could do other areas of academia. But I must also point out that, Sam, it is true that numbers are getting, the country keeps getting bigger with the number of students looking forward to getting to universities, right? place must be made available for them. And that is why I like the point Professor Gov't made, that it is the people, the taxpayer, that funds the university, and their needs will have to be taken care of. I must also say that it is true, and it is clear that courses that has to do with science and technology are very, should I say, expensive to create. But when it comes to the social sciences, normally you don't need much to have the courses, started. And so this also coupled with the fact that subventions from government has over the years been reduced to the extent that the university will have to rely on AFUF, I mean, that is internally generated funds and fees and staff we take from students. It is obvious then that we will have to take in students, and what are the courses that our students aspiring for? It is the courses in, as you rightly pointed out, law, business, should I call it the contemporary, new courses. And so if that is what will take an university to fund itself appropriately, considering the fact that governments over the past few years have not been able to well equip the universities. I mean, come to the universities right now. Most of the infrastructural development that are going on are being done through IGFs. How could we have done that if we had not been adventurous enough to introduce these new courses? These days, you can also think about accommodation. We keep on expanding normally without putting much into accommodation. And so if somebody will go to, say, Lagos, where the law is done traditionally, and he will go and face academic accommodation problems. But in Kumasi or Ashanti region, where the person lives, he could comfortably stay at home and still get the opportunity to pursue the same law at KNWest. Why should a nation, in the name of a so-called mandate, refuse such a student the opportunity to study law? So I believe that it comes with a change of times. Times have changed, and so the universities, as autonomous as they are, should be allowed to look into, should I say, the crystal, and then do what it is supposed to do in order to be able to run very well. So this so-called mandate thing, something that does not sit well with us.
Right. Professor Drew, what do you say about this? Is it not really the case that, for example, the University of Education Winneba was set up for a particular purpose, and there is need for regulation legally to keep it to that mandate of training the trainers? If KNUST, Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's dream and the nation's dream at the time was to give us the engineers and to produce the scientists, the doctors, the physicians, there should be law that keeps them right there rather than diversifying in the manner that they have done?
But before I go on, let me ask, does the law that grants mandates to the University of Ghana, the law that grants mandates to the University of Cape Coast, the existing law that grants mandates to Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, has that act in any way changed? The mandate has been prescribed by each of these acts, and it has not changed. So what difference would it make if these acts are harmonized and presented as a harmonized bill? What would it change? Are we saying that by harmonizing the act, commitment to the mandates and suppression of peering will cease? Are we saying that harmonization of the act will prevent University of Cape Coast, for instance, from running a medical program? Are we saying that it will prevent University of Ghana from running education programs? So we see Samson, I think that the government is only using this to cover up the real intent of the bill. And with your permission, I think let me just link it up. If we go to Article 45, permit me to read, Article 47, it reads, the minister may give directives on matters of policy through the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission to a public university, and the public university shall comply. Samson, this is the key motivation of the bill. The issue of veering and all those things, they are just using it to clone the real intent. And this is where I think stakeholders' concern has come up. Because if you kill university autonomy, if you kill academic freedom in universities, you destroy quality policy making in the nation. Let me give you 3 instances where I think that this bill, if it goes through, the university will suffer. In 2010, I was the chairman of council of Takoradi Polytechnic, now Takoradi Technical University. A deputy minister calls me as chairman and directs that I should ask the then rector to proceed on leave. I asked why, because the act and the statutes clearly indicates that the chairman is a chairman of council, and the council is the highest decision-making body. And so I drew his attention to this. Eventually, I was nearly removed, but for the authorities then going strictly by the provisions of the act. And so that decision couldn't go through. In 2011, another deputy minister of education, by radio announcement, decided that a program that had been approved by the academic board of the University of Cape Coast, granted accreditation by the National Accreditation Board, by radio announcement, that deputy minister ordered that that program should be removed from University of Cape Coast, specifically from the Institute for Educational Planning and Administration to GIMPA, by radio announcement. There too, we had to make reference to the Act provisions. And because of that, that couldn't be implemented. Currently, there was someone, the Institute of Educational Planning and Administration has been upgraded to a Category 2 status by UNESCO. And there's someone who has been actively involved in this. That person was to be granted a position at that place. The Vice Chancellor couldn't in effect that because the Minister of Education is alleged to have made a pronouncement against the appointment of that particular person. So you see, if this bill goes through and Article 47 as it is goes through, we stand to experience a situation where in future, even the appointment of a laborer in the university has to be determined by the Minister of Education. And this is why, for me, I think that this bill is a non-starter. The existing provisions we have in our Act provides for accountability and all those things that the proposed bill, harmonized bill, wants to do. And so let us strengthen the Act, the operationalization of the existing Act, and then encourage governing councils to ensure that operational challenges within each university are corrected. Government must intervene, but government must not interfere. This bill seeks to make government interfere in university governance, and it must not be allowed.
Thank you. Now let's hear briefly from the GRASAG president on the question of veering away from the core mandate, but also very importantly, the section 47 that Professor Odro has just mentioned, which he says is the real intention of government and not about veering away from the mandate. The memorandum or the review done by UTAG says that, unfortunately, the bill does not provide any avenues to the public university if, in its opinion, a particular policy directive is inimical to the mission and vision of the public university. In other words, if the implementing body, i.e. the public university, is not in consonance with any policy directive from government, it becomes redundant and difficult to implement. The provision also offends institutional autonomy. Thus, we call for it to be expunged. Is it your view, Samuel, that this is the real intent, to have the minister, as it were, direct how the universities should work?
Yeah. So, I mean, in the instance of the hearing of the university's mandate, the question we are asking ourselves, Samson, is that we should just imagine a situation where only University of Ghana runs a law faculty, or imagine a situation when only JoyNews is running medical school or engineering program. How many professionals of that sort can you produce as a nation? Look at the situation that even we have 4 universities running medical programs in addition to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Science. And we still lack medical doctors in our district. So if we say universities should go by their core mandate, you are into business, run business program, you are into science, run science program, how many doctors can we produce? How many engineers can the nation produce? How many lawyers can the nation produce? So the argument of gearing up, I think, is a non-starter at all. And as I said earlier, NCT is a supervisory body of the tertiary institutions, and they approve the programs of the university, and it is a state agency. Right. NAB actually accredits every program. In fact, before your program is accredited, you have to go through series of approvals back and forth with NAB before your programs are approved. And NAB is a quasi-state institution. So it cannot be that government does not have control over the programs the universities are running. Government really has a say in the program the universities are running. That is why we also believe that the argument that has been expended so far, that the government just wants to control universities and using these two excuses as reasons, should not really be tenable, and we should not accept. Okay. Can you imagine something that the membership of the University Council even has been reduced in such a way that it affects student representation on the University Council? Hitherto, GRASAG had membership on the University Council. The GRASAG and the SRC presidents were on the University Council. And with these two student representatives on the council, we were able to represent students' interests in such a way that the students' interests were always on the table at the University Council, both at the undergraduate level and the postgraduate level. Now, with this bill that is being introduced, government has removed the rep from the postgraduate association in such a manner that only the undergraduates will have this on the council. It is just a way to bully its way through in terms of policy and directives in the university. And we do not accept that this should be the way forward. So I think generally the argument is holistic from every quarter that this bill only seeks to give government control, and this control is only needed that they can do anything without hindrance from the council or from the university management. And what government is doing now, I believe, is that they want to even be active participants in the day-to-day running of the university. They want to be active participants in the day-to-day running of the university. And invariably, the university become like a secondary school. So, in I think 2019, the headmaster for Agri Memorial Secondary School was dismissed because of what they call a sabotage of a policy by government. It can happen that a vice chancellor, because the education has given a directive, and the vice chancellor is saying that this directive is related to the interest of this university, that vice chancellor will also be dismissed as well by the council or by the minister, because the law says you shall comply. So if you don't comply, then you actually face the fact. But we can't run our university in this manner with fear and with authoritative control. We cannot run our university in this manner. That is why we are also against the bill in totality.
Okay. I have now been joined by Vincent Eko Asafwa, who is Director of Communications of the Ministry of Education. Vincent, thank you very much for joining us.
Samson, good morning.
Great. Thanks for joining us. I'll come to you shortly, but before I do that, let me come to Professor Tia on the question raised about clause 47 of the bill, which says the Minister of Education shall give directions as to policy and the university shall comply, mandatory, shall comply. Apart from that problem, there are also problems that some of the reviews have raised, including the issue of research having to be subject to the prior approval of the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, which is also to be set up. Again, admission to the universities will become completely not under your control as a university. You don't determine who comes in the university. How are these unlawful, and why should they be opposed? Because if it is harmonized, anybody puts in the application, just like you go to SHS. There's a computerized system that determines where you go. You just get up and go. The universities don't have to determine that we are the ones who will approve that you come to us or you don't come to us. And beyond that, the question of the direction. Why is the suspicion that a minister will be giving a direction that is not in the interest of the advancement of the university? Why that suspicion?
We have a number of structures in place, and these structures are supposed to regulate the functioning of the university. Key among them at the senior most level is the University Council. The University Council has powers clearly defined for them in the law, both in the Act and in the statutes. So why should a minister be giving out directives and then the university will have to comply? So clearly it's a case where it veers into undemocratic territories, where the government will be able to influence what happens at the university.
But already you say the government will have 9 appointees over more than majority, and they are more than the quorum that is needed at the council. So what this clause is doing, they can equally do at council. So what's the point?
Yes, this one is even more dangerous, because it's as if when the directive comes today, then it's being implemented.
It says you shall comply.
Yes, with the council, at least there'll be some procedural issues to go through. Yes, so it is adding to the difficulty that will be placed in the way of the university to be able to function normally. And then it talks about external control. That external control is also being beefed up, and so it makes it more difficult.
So that's my question then. Yeah. What's the suspicion and fear, apart from the excesses that Professor Drew refers to, where some minister picks a phone and tries to, call the shots, and they resisted such stuff? Why should you have fear that a minister who is responsible for education will not be thinking good about the advancement of the university? So if they give a directive, you should not be compelled to go by it.
Samson, we've made a point that people, ministers and other appointees of government may not necessarily be people who have the competence and or the expertise.
And they are beholden to government.
They are beholden to government. So for that matter, they are not able to make independent-minded decisions that is in connection with the ensuring that the university's statutes and objectives are met. And so in the end of the day, it's to serve the interests of the government, and certainly there will be a problem there. Yes.
The bit of an aspect about this is that you seem to be also concerned that through the tertiary education regulatory bill 2019, if that is also passed, then the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission will be performing a function in the fashion of a regulator rather than a liaison of sorts between the universities and the ministry and government. You think that this is a further layer of control through the minister? This group would take the job of the National Accreditation Board. Is the National Accreditation Board presently something you don't like because you're happy about the fact that it approves your programs?
We don't have problems with the National Accreditation Board. Every program that comes into place, or any institution that wants to be established as a tertiary institution, needs to have some regulation and mechanisms in place to ensure that it really performs according to the dictates of the law. So we don't have any problem with that. But to have a situation where this institution that we are talking about, when it comes into place, it is going to become more beholden to the government. The structures that are being put in there is to limit even the current position of the law of the National Commission on Higher Education, which is like a buffer between the university and the government, is going to be broken. And so the government will be able to use the new institution is going to set up to be able to interfere in the running of the university. So it seems to be some kind of structure in place. Every stage of it, the government is trying to introduce controls into the university. So if you put everything together, cumulatively, it really breaks down the institutional autonomy of the university. It affects the ability of the academics. It also affects the ability of the students. In other words, the entire academic community to be able to function, creating that atmosphere that is needed for research to be undertaken, for knowledge to be produced, and for dissemination of the knowledge, which is for the well-being of the society.
So, Professor Makampo, you earlier spoke about research, which is something you do, and how you need to do to even assist your students to be able to get the needed upgrades, and then you can grow, you know, the next generation of lecturers and teachers. The Ghana Academy of Sciences Arts and Sciences Review made one point that it is extremely disturbing to the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences that researchers can proceed with research project agreements only with the approval of the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission. How bad is this?
Samson, it is terrible. Let me just say that when we talk about academic freedom, we are not saying that we want to get up and just do anything. We're talking about the freedom to think and do research on important issues. There has been a recent example in Cameroon where a lecturer was dismissed because he inserted an exam question that sought to look at some of the teacher upheavals in Cameroon. As we know, there have been serious issues between the so-called Francophone and Anglophone areas of the country. A lecturer decides to ask a question in a political science exam so that students can think about these issues, and he is dismissed for this. The Francophone countries have the kind of system that this bill seems to be directing us to. And it means that the freedom to decide what you put on your syllabus, which course you will teach, which program will be established, which exams you will set, which research you will do, who you will engage research with, are all in the hands of the Minister of Education, because the clause says, and I read, the Minister may give directives on matters of policy through the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission. And this is on establishment of academic units, financial matters, research and other collaborations. So the so-called Tertiary Education Commission is working for the minister. He is working through them, or she is working through them. So take, for example, currently I have a research agreement with a colleague at the University of Birmingham, funded by the British Academy. Imagine that we want to examine corruption at the Ministry of Education. Do you think we will get the support to get those research monies? The Minister of Education at that point in time will say, this is not research worth doing, or they will just delay us if they are so minded to do. But let us also add that
there was a minister who superintended investigations of an agency of his government, GIDA, to find out the rot in the system. So it's possible that the Minister of Education will actually be happy to know the rot in the system.
We should not make laws for individual human beings. I think that in this country, we are complaining about our constitution, that it was made to satisfy somebody. Let us not make laws thinking that there's a good or a bad person in office. Governments come, governments go. We have layers of governance to check individual flaws. Me, I think I'm not a bad person, but I'm human. There may be A or B that I like and I don't like. If I have unfettered powers, surely I will be tempted to squeeze the one that I do not like.
Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
We are human. We should not set laws that allow human beings and governments to do what they want to do, and not with education. Education is the pinnacle of how we get our societies to develop. That's where the thinking goes on. That's where the research and development happens. If this bill passes, we are going to, in our tradition, we have 4 or 8 years of one government. It will be 8 years on campus, where the political climate is the NDC, the next time is the NPP. So me, if I'm a supporter of this or the other party, or am even perceived to be one, during the 8 years or 4 years that the other party, or the other party is in government, I will keep quiet. I will not do my research that may be perceived to be problematic.
Okay.
I will not do the social policy work that academics do for free.
Also go to the question of academic freedom, which we will deal with.
And I should, Samson, I have heard informally from 1 or 2 of our international partners, I mentioned that I'm acting Dean of International Programs, that if this law goes into force, they will discontinue their programs with us. Because they cannot trust that there will be a bad government who will say, there's a crisis, there's an emergency, let's close the university down. And then, for how long? In 83, 84, the universities were closed down for the longest period we can imagine. So that interference is a possibility. And donors and partners do not want to take a risk. If they don't work with Ghanaians, they will work with South Africans or Nigerians or whoever. So if there is a potential or a perceived threat to that freedom to do the research, they will just withdraw.
Okay. Now let me get to echo Vincent Echo Asefwa of the ministry to seek to justify some of the points here. I've been playing the devil's advocate, but I'll admit that it's been difficult playing it at certain points because very clearly some of the provisions and what we seek to do appear to be unconscionable, to be very charitable. One of my viewers, there's a couple of them who have sent a number of messages. One, Kwame Sapongesiedu says that one thing I enjoyed in my graduate school days was my ability to walk into lectures and seminars in the humanities to enjoy these fields of study. In particular, I enjoyed the literacy, economics, and social anthropology lectures. This university was set up in 1901 as a polytechnic with a core mandate to train scientists and blue-collar engineers. You're talking about KNSC? Okay. Today, these 3 sidebars that took me away from the streets of biomedical research are the underpinnings of most advocacy I engage in. Has this university drifted from its core mandate by venturing into arts? That's a question Kwame is asking. Another question or view shared by Kweku Entwibo-Esiakon is, the universities may have veered from original programs or disciplines, but they still provide higher education. And he highlights higher education. What's wrong with that? The world is changing and universities must adapt rather than stick to specific subjects. He says that, does the university cease to exist or function when there is an emergency? This is a spurious excuse for government intervention in universities. And that brings me to the question for you, Vincent. Of the two-pronged reasons, main reasons for the bill, universities veering away from their core disciplines and revelations in the Auditor General's report of improprieties in the utilization of resources. What is this harmonization you are seeking going to do to solve the problems you have outlined in the memorandum?
Well, Samson, let me say a very good morning to your cherished viewers and listeners. Let me first of all indicate that this is not the first time Ghana as a nation is experiencing reforms in the education sector. One that can be readily available and can come to mind is the 1987 educational reforms, the tertiary education system, where there was a revelation that about 0.7% of the relevant age group was represented at the various universities in Ghana here, the relevant age group catch point. And if you could juxtapose that with the other countries, the global nations that we have, you could realize that some nations were even having up to 50%. Again, we also have the 2004 educational reforms, which had the specific mandate that is by the committee to ensure that we upgrade institutions such as the NAFTI, upgrade GIG, and the Regional Maritime Academy, and what have you. And so, somewhere around 2018, as part of the usual reforms that the Ministry of Education had to go into, the Minister of Education, that is Dr. Matthew Pempe, sanctioned a committee that was chaired by Tego. And if you check the terms of references of the Professor Tego committee, the pivot for its terms of references was to ensure that they produce a reference document containing essential government policies and institutional best practices that would position tertiary education institutions to optimally execute their national institutional mandate. And so clearly, we had seen that if we had to bring about a reference document that every university in this country would resort to in terms of governance and administration, in terms of access, in terms of quality assurance, in terms of administration, what have you. Clearly, we decided that it would be proper to bring about some standardization as far as the management of our universities are concerned. Now, if a university, for example, University of Ghana, so decides that as part of its management mandate, they can go into a loan or they can secure a loan for the University of Ghana without recourse to the government. The problem has not been that government or Ministry of Education should be interested in what the loan is being used for. But in instances whereby there is a default or there is a problem by the University of Ghana, that the University of Ghana will now rush to the Ministry of Education or government that government should come to their aid. Then, ab initio, it suggests that the Ministry of Education or the government should always have a role to play in the administration or, if you like, the governance of the various universities, because if you are making decisions as to how resources are being used in the various universities without recourse to government, but when there's a problem, you resort to government, then these were part of the rationale, if you like, the reasons how or why government had to have a role to play. Now, if you check the current tertiary education policy that gave birth to the public university bill,
a lie.
Clearly, the tertiary education policy sought to ensure that as part of the management of the various universities, we will have to ensure what we call external representation and internal representation, or if you like, the oversight responsibility that government needs to play through the Ministry of Education. We need to play it adequately. Now, the internal regulation or the internal administration that is supposed to be done by the individual governing council would also have to be played by the various governing council. So when you check how the appointments are being made onto the governing council, you clearly realize that government or the Ministry of Education play the role of the external oversight responsibility as enshrined in tertiary education policy. That was sanctioned by the Ministry of Education in 2018. And so, Samson, if I have to sum it as my preliminary comment, the idea of government, or if you like, the Ministry of Education, putting up such a bill was to ensure that there is maximum oversight responsibility that is supposed to be played by the government, and there should also be accountability on the part of the various university councils, or if you like, the university management that we have in our various universities. Because if you check the current acts or statutes that governs the various universities, now the act or the statute that governs University of Ghana is different from what governs University of
Vincent,
different from what governs Joynewstv.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions that I may get quick answers to.
Right.
Your emphasis is on accountability.
Right.
Now, is it the suggestion that by populating the council with the government representation appointment, so to speak, accountability will be achieved?
Absolutely, yes. Reason be that when the management of the university, now, Samson, the management of the university that is supposed to be headed by the Vice Chancellor so desires to go on to certain decisions by the management of the university, the only checks and balances that we could ensure that in instances that those decisions that are made by the management will not be to the benefit of the university and the Ghanaian populace at large, the only avenue that we have is at the governing council. And so the governing council is where government will have to populate its members to ensure that we do the checks and balances.
I don't get that logic.
If the internal representation
I don't get that logic. That presently the accounting systems exist in the universities. The universities are audited. In fact, Parliament has a role. The Auditor General, not only the Auditor General, but Parliament has a role. All other state institutions are subject to this process of accountability by way of their financial management. You are saying that the way to achieve a better financial management or accountability is to have government representation dominating and hijacking the council?
Well, I think that I would disagree with the word hijacking. No, we are not doing so. If you could put, let me say, the leadership or management of the University of Ghana on the line, I was part of a meeting that transpired last year. Now, there was a loan and that was secured by the University of Ghana, I think somewhere in 2012, 2013, thereabout, when Professor Yanka, the current Minister of Education in charge of tertiary education, was at the university. In fact, I think he was even part of how the loan was secured. Now, fast forward about 6-7 years, there is a default on the part of the University of Ghana as to how they pay. The University of Ghana is now finding it difficult to pay those amount of money. They now run back to government. So the point I'm making is, if government will now have to be the punching bag as far as certain decisions that were not at the benefit of the various universities were made, then why is it that the same government that is supposed to be at the receiving end of some of these mal decisions that are being made by the universities, that same government or that same Ministry of Education cannot have a say in whatever is being decided upon by the various university councils? So we are of the opinion that if we don't have a role to play as far as the governing councils are concerned, and then whatever happened, for example, in the case of Kenya University when there was that emergency, then it means that going forward we are going to have problems or difficulties with the management of our various universities, because if there is a problem between student bodies and there is a with the management of the universities, and government cannot have a role, or if you like, there is a problem with the SRC and the University Council, who now becomes the person, or if you like, the institution to be able to ensure that some of these things are regulated in a manner. So we realize that as part of the reforms that we have to bring into the tertiary education sector, it was adequate, it was apt for the Ministry of Education to have maximum role or to play a function that can put effective oversight responsibility over the actions and inactions of the various university councils. And
I see. We say that when you are making a law, you normally look for the mischief rule. What mischief is the law supposed to cure? The things you raise as mischief, you have been told that the way to go about them is not to bring a law that brings government directly into executive control of the governance of the university. If people are committing financial malfeasance in the university, if people are not sticking to the financial laws and regulations of this country, the laws are there to deal with them. Is that not so? So why do you need this kind of introduction? You say this is a reform. Reforms are supposed to be the result of wide consultation between the stakeholders, among the stakeholders. Can you say this is the result, and yet there is this almost no approval from the universities, public universities?
Samson, I'm finding it difficult to understand where you are coming from, but the point that should be made is that government, through the Ministry of Education, or if you like, the National Commission for Tertiary Education, at every point in time should ensure that in instances when there are challenges as far as the administration of the various universities are concerned, will have to come in. Now, if you check the acts and the statutes of the various universities, there are instances that the acts or statutes may be silent on how certain problems or how certain challenges are supposed to be dealt with as far as the universities are concerned. Now, if we have seen that the laws that governs the various universities are not meeting the present day administration of the various universities, for us as a government, for us as a Ministry of Education that have an oversight responsibility of all tertiary educations that we have in this country, we decided through the tertiary education policy that we should bring about a harmonization or a standardization of all our laws that governs the various universities, so that there is going to be a single reference document for University of Ghana, for Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, for University of Cape Coast, and all other public universities. So that the administration will be
just maybe some 30 seconds on this. Some 30 seconds on this, and then I will get to Professor Chair to deal with the question of academic freedom. This is where I am coming from, where you say you don't get. These universities have come together and they have done reviews of the law, of the intended law. I have read the reviews. Even from the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, from the CDD, and clearly there is a complete rejection of the bill in the manner that it is now. So that's where I'm coming from. They clearly suggest that this will stifle and slow their global competitiveness. Then, in talking about the academic freedom, how would you look at this situation? You have a council that is dominated by the government, that can form a quorum. It is the council that determines questions of promotion, among others. The universities have long ceased to be mere ivory towers. They are connected to our society. Teachers in the universities are speaking up about issues. Can you imagine any lecturer share a view that is critical of the government of the day when their promotion will be determined by the government's representatives?
Samson, what do we mean by academic freedom? I'll ask this question because for the first time in the history and annals of this country, we have a document that defines what academic freedom is. Hitherto, I could not understand what we mean by academic freedom. Now, is there any part of the bill that is put forward to Parliament that suggests that a university lecturer cannot go ahead with any research and the University Council may have a problem with or without? Is there any part of the bill that shows that a lecturer, or if you like, a staff of the university, cannot do what he or she has been doing before the introduction of this bill? If there is none like that, then issues of academic freedom is one that is exaggerated, in my opinion, because academic freedom does not necessarily mean that the management or the leadership of the various universities could do whatever they want at every point in time.
The questions you have asked, the questions you asked before the answer are answered in the affirmative.
I didn't get that.
The questions you posed are answered in the affirmative. Is there anything in the bill that suggests that an academic's work, research, might be stifled? Clearly, there is. Is there anything that suggests that they may not be able to exercise their freedom that they exercise presently? Clearly, there is.
Well, Samson, I don't see that, because if you check the section 43 of the current bill, which clearly talk about what academic freedom is, I don't see where there is any difficulty that is put, or
match
like
it, match it with 47, match it with 47, and match it with the power of the minister to issue a directive that they must comply with.
Samson, I heard you say that as soon as you say shall, it means mandatory. There is also a case in this country that means that the shall may not necessarily mean mandatorily. Now, the minister may not be acting in his person. The minister may be acting in, or if you like, on behalf of the government. So when your panelists say that because the minister may not have the requisite knowledge to be able to ensure the policy, the policy guidelines that is put forward by the minister, and for that matter, whatever the minister is putting out may not be on the basis of any professional advice. I disagree with that, because if any minister, or if like the Minister of Education, as put out by the bill, suggests that the Minister of Education can bring out any policy direction, that would have to be adhered to, or if you like, obeyed by the various universities. It is a government position, not the minister as a person. Because the minister has been appointed by the government and is supposed to be the representative of the government. So I don't think that when the minister is making any decision,
so exactly as you have said, ultimately, so that government can have maximum control. Please hang on there. We take a break. When we return, I commence with Professor Etia on the question of academic freedom that you are beginning to understand by virtue of this bill. We'll be right back.